Welcome to Buckets. This is Action Network's daily NBA betting podcast. I'm your host, Maria Marino, joined by Brian Fonseca and Michael Fiddle from our Tommy John home studios. We've got best bets for Friday, the 25th. Full slate in the NBA, lot to choose from. And I know that both of you guys have thoughts on the Knicks looking to bounce back after their pretty dismal season debut up in Boston. But before we get your official picks, let's just have a little conversation about the top of the East right now. It's so early. Boston is obviously the top contender. Who do you believe in after that, though? Brian, we'll start with you.
Well, I still think the Knicks are probably the second best team in the East. We just won't see it for a while just because of, regular season. They're working in new parts. Mikal Bridges and Karl Anthony Towns have to get adjusted. And I still liked their regular season under. Like, this is exclusively a playoff thing that I'm talking about. And the regular season win total was 54.5. I think while this team is, has a lot of playoff upside, I don't think they need to win 55 games to be viable, so to speak. I think there's a world where, and this is a team that I like this regular season, where the Cleveland Cavaliers could be the 2 seed. And still, I would pick the Knicks in a playoff series against them if they're the 2-3. But Cleveland, I think, is a team in the Eastern Conference who can be really good because of the things I've been talking about, like on this show leading up to it, where Kenny Atkinson is going to be a fun sort of pace and space hire. We've already seen what Evan Mobley could do in this offense a little bit in that first game where they just tonked Toronto in Canada to start the season. Donovan Mitchell, I think, is going to be great this year. Darius Garland's become underrated, but I think the East, low key, like, and we'll have a bigger conversation about it. But there's some teams that I'm looking at where I'm like, hey, Philly, are you going to be this team that you want to be this season? Milwaukee, also, we've had a lot of questions about them heading into the season because the Eastern Conference, like, Orlando's good. Indiana, I think, is legitimately good. Cleveland's good. Obviously, Boston's good. The Knicks are good. There's 5 teams right there. And then it's like Philly or Milwaukee, like one of those teams, I feel like, or both of them could slip to some degree. And then we could talk about some of the other teams in the East as well. But yeah, I think the East is going to be in a very interesting place all season long.
Cleveland around plus 1,600 to come out of the Eastern Conference behind Milwaukee, Philly, and the Knicks as well. The hire of Kenny Atkinson, I love for Cleveland. I definitely agree with you. I think that they could make some noise. I mean, they were right there a season ago. What is your skepticism, though, Brian, about Milwaukee and or Philly?
I feel like, don't you just think one of those teams could fall into the play-in? Like, because Philly was last year,
Right.
And we have this impression like Philly's gotten better, which they have on paper. But the issue is Joel Embiid's already missing games. We don't know how many games he's going to actually play. Maybe he gets to 60. There's a world where, like, they're conserving his energy. They're doing injury management. Now there's an investigation going on. And it's like, is Joel Embiid going to get to a number that they want him to get to? Or is he going to actually play and then actually get hurt and then miss more time because he's 30 years old now, right?
Yeah.
And with more mileage and having just played in the Olympics, where some people didn't think it was the best idea. Even though I love international basketball, I could see where they're coming from. And as it pertains to Milwaukee, people are just concerned about the injuries with them too. Like, Damian Lillard's older. Chris Middleton had double ankle surgery during the offseason. You know what I mean? And is already, like, banged up. And, is Brook Lopez fall off going to happen because he's in the 17th season of his career? There's just a lot of questions with both of those teams. And I was looking at, if people are interested in, because, this is a betting podcast after all, people are interested in betting either of them to make it to the play-in. Like, the Bucks are plus 310 right now, and the Sixers are plus 245 to fall into the play-in. And you could talk me into potentially, like, hey, those numbers should actually be reversed, but we can get to that at some point. But I think, to me, like, it's something I would look at just from the standpoint of, like, I mentioned all those other regular season teams, and Indiana, Cleveland, Orlando, obviously Boston, obviously New York. That's 5 right there. I feel like could have better regular seasons than at least one of those Philly Milwaukee groups, if not both of them, depending on how things could slide. Then the high end of things for Philly and Milwaukee is still higher than some of the teams I just mentioned. So I don't want to disrespect them totally, right? Like Philly could still get a top 4, Milwaukee could still get a top 4 if things go right. But as of right now, it looks like there's some slide potential for both those teams. I would be a little bit worried about, and this isn't like a one game samples type of thing. It's a preseason thought that is bleeding over into the regular season now that we've actually started the games.
Preseason plus one game.
Exactly.
I'm gonna throw some cold water on this, and I know it's not the most fun, but it's been one game. It's been 2 games. Boston might look a little better than we expected. Philly's playing with nobody. Milwaukee looked fantastic. If we're gonna say who can keep up and shoot with Boston, look at the threes that Damian Lillard, Taurean Prince. You're getting Giannis, the best player in the East, and you'll get back Chris Middleton, and you have a shooting big in Brook Lopez. I see the whole conversation and I understand it because some of these teams start a little weak, but it's been one game and there's really no change in any opinion in my mind.
No, I agree, but to me, this is more of this is a preseason prior for me. Like I was thinking about this before the season started. And I haven't really changed my mind on it because now we're seeing Joel Embiid miss a week or whatever. So to me, it's like it's something worth monitoring as the season progresses, just from a macro standpoint. I'm not telling people who are listening to this, hey, bet this right now. That's not what I'm saying, but it's something to watch.
Well, I agree with keeping an eye on something like a Philly to make the play-in, considering now we know that there is an investigation happening with Embiid, and just, the health is always a concern for that team. When it comes to Milwaukee, I actually think their chemistry should be better this year. I know health is still a concern given the age of some of their stars, but they should have more coaching continuity. Like, I think overall, this year's got to be considerably better. Like last year was just so underwhelming from Milwaukee. I feel like it's got to be up from here. But keeping in more with the immediate, if you will. So the Knicks on their home floor on Friday, taking on the Pacers. So as soon as I saw this, I was like, okay, a little bit of a revenge spot, I would say, wouldn't you? I mean, losing to the Pacers in 7 back in the playoffs. So, Michael Fiddle, you like the Knicks here as well?
Yeah, definitely think there's slight revenge spot. Definitely an overreaction to game 1 for the Knicks not looking great. And on the Pacers side of that, they were the very public side against the Detroit Pistons. It was clear reverse line movement when you're talking about where the money's coming in versus where the tickets are coming in. There was money coming in on Indiana, but the line was moving towards Detroit. So the books were willing to say for game 1, we'll take Detroit against you guys. So anyone who did have a Pacers ticket in game 1 needs to send Tyrese Halliburton a handwritten note, maybe record a video of yourself at 4 a.m. after the club, and let him know thank you for hitting that late 3 that was completely meaningless and getting the cover, because there is no way that the Pacers should have covered game 1. And now we get like that sample size baked into this current line. So I definitely think this is a spot to be all over the Knicks. Now, when we were starting the podcast and starting up, this was at 4.5 a few places. Universally has moved to 5s across the board. 5 is one of the more common key numbers in the NBA. It's the second most common push number, right? So when you talk about obtaining the 4.5 versus the 5, if it's going to land on that 5 frequently, that is a big difference. I'm still comfortable playing the Knicks at -5, but I would now bring that down maybe from 1 unit to 3/4 of a unit, moving off the number.
Brian, how do you feel about the Knicks here? Obviously, Michael is talking a lot about just the number and why that's favorable. Touched on the revenge spot a little bit too, but from a matchup perspective, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, Indiana, like in the semifinals, they're going to look to speed this team up. Something I was saying last year in the playoffs, and obviously with the Knicks defense being in disarray, they're going to try to take that apart. Now, it's only one game. I think the Knicks defense is going to, they'll get it together, but it's going to be a while. Like, we may see it in 10 games. We may see it in 20. We may see it in Christmas. Like, it's going to be a while. And ultimately, what Indiana is probably going to try to attack is, well, Tyrese Halliburton, who may be guarded by Mikal Bridges, but obviously they'll try to create some switches and mismatches there. You have Jalen Brunson at the point. You have Karl-Anthony Towns at the 5. Those are two weak spots, respectfully, on the defensive end for the Knicks, that they're not going to be able to hide everything with Josh Hart and OG Anunoby and obviously Mikal Bridges. So I think with Indiana, they have Miles Turner, who, he's somebody who can stretch Karl-Anthony Towns to come out to the 3-point line and, actually hit some 3-pointers. Pascal Siakam attacking, and he's going to be a problem for them potentially. And we'll see ultimately where this goes. I'm with Fiddle on this, where I do think the Knicks should obviously cover this game. This is a revenge spot. I'm not going to sleep on Indiana, though I will point out they were losing at the end of the first, second, and third quarter against the Pistons last game in Detroit.
Right.
A Detroit team that I like. I don't think they're going to be complete chumps this year. But the Pacers were losing for most of that game, outscored them 33-19 in the fourth quarter, and then they ended up winning that one. But I do think that the Knicks are the spot here. I would lean in that direction right now, -5. I would like them in the first half as well, which is probably going to be, by the time people are hearing this, -3. I usually love revenge spots in the first half as opposed to full game, just in case. And I think the Knicks, in front of the Garden crowd, at the very least get off to a better start than they did from a defensive standpoint, but also from an offensive standpoint than they did against the Boston Celtics.
Right. I mean, the Knicks were just so demoralized early up in Boston because the Celtics were just hitting not only every shot, but just so many threes. And when that happens, you don't get any transition opportunities. There's just no momentum. It was actually insane.
What you do is you break the controller and you turn off the game.
Right. That's 100%.
You turn off the PS5 and you're like, nah, I'm
absolutely
done with this.
Felt like a video game. But because of that, despite everything we've already talked about with, the Knicks are going to be back at home. Their crowd's going to be, angry at the Pacers and they're going to be rowdy. The fact that the Knicks did get their asses kicked in the first game makes me like this spot even more, because I feel like they're going to come out with a little bit more urgency, and especially with defending the 3-point line, which we know the Pacers can get dangerous from there as well. So any final thoughts on this game before we move on?
I think it's also an over spot.
Okay.
There's 226 and a half on the board. I think this closes at least 1 point higher. And we saw great offensive output when these two teams played each other in a playoff environment. So coming back now, adding Karl-Anthony Towns and more spacing to the Knicks, they were lighting up the scoreboard in the playoffs. We're seeing the market move towards the over again. I think this is another strong over spot as well. Knicks and over.
Yeah, I
probably agree with that. Separately.
Yeah.
Got it. Okay.
I probably agree with that. Just from the standpoint of we were just talking about where the Knicks defense, it's only the second game of the season, but it's not completely sharp the way it's going to be later on. So it's a good spot for the Pacers to try to push that pace, and we'll probably see both teams, collectively.
Yeah, and also, we don't know exactly what the defenses are yet, but we do know the Pacers defense wasn't their strong suit last year. And the Knicks, despite, the really bad loss the other night, their field goal percentage was still great. They just weren't hitting as many threes. So I could definitely see both of those things happening. Fiddle, what else do you like on this Friday?
My favorite bet on the card is the Atlanta Hawks -5 now. Another one where we had it at 4.5 30 minutes ago, and now it's 5s across the board. Good for me, bad for content, but I still think this is a strong spot to back the Atlanta Hawks. I'm still comfortable playing the -5, still comfortable going full unit and not bringing down my bet size. I think this could easily close at 6 or even beyond that. Charlotte Hornets coming off of a lucky road win, down 17 at points in the second half against the Houston Rockets before Houston couldn't buy a bucket even. Charlotte got some great threes, got some deep looks. Grant Williams makes an insanely clutch shot. Ultimately, the Charlotte Hornets lack depth, and the Atlanta Hawks have a lot of depth this season. And Brian talked about preseason priors earlier. If we look at preseason markets and understand where were some of the sharp angles coming into the season, perhaps the biggest one was to back the Atlanta Hawks. And so if we can find ways to do that in game markets before the spreads reflect what they really should be. I'm going to continue to back the Atlanta Hawks. I think they're going to be a side where if you take the opening line, you're going to end with closing line value, and do that in the long term. That should be a good thing.
So the Hawks in their opener got by the Nets on Wednesday, and I think the biggest point that you made there, Fiddle, was just the Hornets kind of maybe being overvalued based on what happened in their first game. Brian, anything to add there?
Yeah, let's show what the Hornets slander, somebody who has their over for wins this season. I do think like it'd be as much as I do like the Hornets more than consensus. Now, I don't like the Hornets where like, hey, they're gonna win, 50 games or whatever the case may be. That's not the case. But as somebody who does like them, yeah, I'd have a hard time seeing them begin the season with back-to-back road wins. Also, that's part of it.
Right.
Whereas like, with other teams, you can totally see that. With Charlotte, yeah, this is probably a spot to back Atlanta. So I may be tailing on this one. I also think there could be a lot of points in this game as well, potentially.
By the way, just out of curiosity, what did you get their win total at?
It was 29.5 or 28.5. I think it was 29.5.
Okay.
Yeah,
okay.
so
Fair enough.
1 down, 29 to go, baby.
Brian, one down where they were a 8-point underdog going into that game in a road game. So like legitimately won. So if we look at like win totals and equity, how equity changes within win totals, the Warriors win and they were 6.5 point, 7-point favorites, right? So they're expected to win. So their equity stake in that, I mean, it's minor because it's one game, but their equity stake pretty much stays even. Hornets legitimately get a boost. And I'm with you. I've been on some Hornets long shot tickets like Charles Lee, 50-1 coach of the year, LaMelo, 50-1 most threes. So I'm totally with you that this should be a, plus year from what we expect from the Hornets. But I think landing in Atlanta off of a win after being in Houston, I mean, wonder what those young boys were doing the last 24 hours.
Yeah, and Brandon Miller is expected to miss this game, which is
that's another big one. That would move the line a full point and a half.
Yeah.
Well, Fiddle, I know you have at least one other pick for the slate that you like, and it's kind of spicy. So tell us about it.
It is very rare that I come on an action podcast, really any type of form, and give something that's plus money. Yeah, I'm known for swallowing some vig, eating some juice, taking my fruit and squeezing the juice out of it and saying, "Oh, there's some plus EV juice right there." I'm going to go with the Chicago Bulls plus 370 on the money line against the Milwaukee Bucks. Now, I think both of these teams are going to become a bit more reliant on the three-pointer this year. We saw that with Taurean Prince and Damian Lillard going nuclear in game one against the Philadelphia 76ers. We have the Bulls coming off of a loss, but seeming like their chemistry in their locker room is in a really good place. Now they travel to Milwaukee. It is a really short, I mean, they were in New Orleans, but it's a really short road trip from their home in Chicago. It's a trip that's a divisional game. It's one that they've played against this core of the Bucks in playoff series the last few years. Like I think 2 out of the last 3 years, the Bulls and Bucks have met up in the first round or in the playoffs. And so for those reasons, you get similar core groups that know each other. So if I can pick off, an early season plus 370 and have some real like juice on my side and say, let me back Billy Donovan and strong coaching. Let me back 3-point variance, and let me back like a little bit of a wake-up call for the Bucks getting a really easy game one, and now coming back and being like, oh, this is a real NBA team. It's not replacing Embiid for Andre Drummond and Paul George for more Kelly Oubre and what Brian, you know the guy's name. Gershon, what's Yabusele?
Gershon Yabusele, yes. Olympic legend.
Got it.
Not Paul George, though.
Not Paul George at all. I'll say this about that game. I will be watching the benches very closely because one of the concerns I do have with Milwaukee is their depth again. And while they are injured already, as we established with Chris Middleton, and I love Bobby Portis. Like I'm probably gonna lose money. He's one of those guys where like you bet every year for me that just bet him every year to win 6 man of the year, willingly gonna lose money. But like I feel like we need to consider big men more often. I know Nasri just won the award last year, but like he's really a shooting guard in a power forward's body. So I wouldn't say big man necessarily in that traditional sense, but Naz Reid is also great. But with Milwaukee, I mean, they're thin, and Chicago sneakily, like, they have some players coming off the bench. Like, we just saw Jalen Smith, for example, come in and drop 15 points in 17 minutes. And we just saw Ayo Dosunmu, continue to get big minutes. He wasn't amazing that first game, but I do think like he's going to be a factor for them all season long. We saw him break out a little bit last year when the Bulls were shorthanded. And this particular matchup, we'll see what Lonzo Ball, he was still on a minutes restriction, how much he can impact the game. But I think the Bulls, like, I don't know if they're going to be like a great team or whatever. I know a lot of people are on their overs, a lot of people are on their unders here. So kind of divisive in that sense. But I do think like they're not a team that's completely shallow. And I worry about that with Milwaukee. How is their bench going to hold up in some of these games?
Bobby Portis, in case you're wondering, plus 1,100 or so right now for sixth man of the year. I'll tell you what. If the season
I caught that, Fiddle. I caught that.
What?
He made his eyes really wide because Bobby Portis,
Oh, okay. Gotcha. So if you're watching
Bobby Portis embraces that, right? Bobby Portis memes himself with his Bobby Portis eyes. So for me to do it, it's not like I would do it to his face.
Yeah. Okay, we know. No, I was just going to say, like, if the season were a game, I mean, that's his award. It's his award right now.
Yes.
So there's that. But I actually do have another question, Fiddle, strategy-wise. So you were talking about how, like, it's rare for you to bet plus money on things. How does your unit size change in this scenario?
If I'm taking, like, such a long shot, you definitely need to kind of quantify not only what your edge is to what your bet is. So there's, like, in one sense, Maria, Brian's still laughing at me. In one sense,
that's not what I'm laughing at.
Maria knows. You're just being immature because I said the words unit size, right? Is that what's happening?
That is amazing. I did not know that was the joke.
As soon as I said that, Brian,
she looked at me and shook her head.
I'm like, oh my God. Can we just be mature?
You want an honest answer?
All right.
Sorry, Fiddle, please continue with your actual betting advice and ignore the children here on the podcast.
I was going to make another joke. Okay. When it comes to these situations, you do have to quantify what your actual edge is relative to what your actual hit probability is. So if you have, let's say, a 5, 6, 7% edge and you think that's what your plus EV in a situation is, that would be a huge number. But if you're betting into something with incredibly low implied probability, it's still very kind of minuscule chance to hit that bet, and therefore you don't want to go as big into those positions. So it's a thing called risk staking. When I bet, a good way to do it is like use 2 units as a benchmark position. So maybe if you're betting a minus 110 and you feel really strongly about it, you're betting 2.2 to win 2. Maybe if you're betting a plus 360 and you feel really strongly about it, you're betting a little more than half a unit to win 2, right? So you can work in those directions to know that your take home is still relatively the same, regardless of what kind of bet you win.
I appreciate that, and I feel like your guidance was worth the
joke was worth it.
No, the interesting YouTube comments that we're bound to get now on this video. So thank you for that. All right. On that note, Brian, unless you have anything constructive to add.
No. Listen, everybody, enjoy the games and be patient with everybody here at Action Network. We're doing our very best.
Hey, look, we gave out, I think, some valuable plays here. Michael Fiddle likes the Knicks -5, -4.5, of course, if you can get it. Also, the Hawks, the same number. And the Bulls money line, very spicy. Brian is on board with the Knicks, also likes them in the first half.
Yep.
And potentially, if I'm not mistaken, a Knicks first half and a Knicks second half double result.
Yeah, like a first half full game, maybe, or I may just do the first half. But it feels like those would be the spots. And I think I think in that particular game, Fiddle also mentioned the over, and I probably like that too, given what we've seen just between those two teams in the playoff environment, as you mentioned, but also in terms of the Knicks, I like their defense. We still have question marks about it, so we could see an over there.
All right, you guys. It's been fun, but I'm going to let y'all go. Once again, I'm Maria Marino for Michael Fiddle and Brian Fonseca. Thanks so much for listening to Buckets. Make sure you follow the pod, of course. Follow everybody on the Action Network app. Subscribe to the YouTube channel if you haven't yet. And let's get buckets.